Hello there, folks. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from the local library in Lowell, Michigan. Happy to be here once again, and they're kind enough to offer me a space so that I can have the pleasure and the privilege of hosting this special session on Giving USA. The results just came out this week, and we have a really incredible panel of people who are going to be sharing some insights with you after we share some of the results themselves. So if you haven't heard about the results this week, I think you're in for some very interesting and surprising information, but also what is lacking potentially in that report, which is very extensive, is the kind of lens that we offered on healthcare specifically, and that's exactly why you're here. So I'm going to, in a moment, just introduce our panelists and invite them to come up here. Then we're going to go ahead and go through a few slides of the report in case it's unfamiliar to you, and then I'm going to pass the baton over to my colleague and friend, Nathan Chappell, who you can see already pictured right here with us, and he'll take the lead along with Betsy Chapin Taylor, who is not visible yet, but will be in a moment, who will be also kind of co-pioneering this discussion with two very special guests, Jenny Soderholm, who wasn't pictured in those slides. We apologize for that, but she's a recent addition, and we are very happy to have her. And she's the Senior VP and CDO out at Minnesota Children's. And then also Chris O'Connor, who you just saw appear there on the screen, who is the Chief Development Officer at Mass General. So you can tell we have an extraordinary group of people here. I didn't tell you about Betsy, I'm sorry. Betsy Chapin Taylor, of course, is the CEO of Accordant. And Nathan, if you're not familiar with his work, well, you can see his book hovering in the background. That's The Generosity Crisis. So when he's not working as kind of the man of all things in AI, both within the world of DonorSearch AI, and more broadly, he's also speaking on these topics through the Giving Institute, which is why it's such a pleasure to have this group of people to discuss these issues today. We have a couple ways for you to engage in this conversation. We cannot see or hear you. You know how Zoom works. That doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. We want you to be a part of this discussion, especially because the information may be new to you, or it may validate concerns or interests that you already had. We certainly want your questions. And we also want you to talk amongst one another. So you've already found the chat. I can see that right now. Keep using that thing. Q&A is a perfect place, though, to store up your questions, like squirrels store up nuts for the winter, so that our panelists can address them as we conclude the slides and they jump into the conversation led once again by Betsy and Nathan. So with that, I'm going to jump in and get us underway. I do want to mention, as I always do, that this series is sponsored by our friends at DonorSearch. That's all you're really going to hear about DonorSearch today, unless somebody mentions them. I think that was the end of that poster. So if you want to know more about DonorSearch, and they're not responsible for that poster, just look them up at DonorSearch.net. You can find out all about them there and see a recording of this conversation later, but do not leave because you're a part of it right now because you're here live. So I'm going to take the liberty, if I may, of sharing some of the information from Giving USA now, and then we will get underway with the discussion. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so let me go ahead and get us started. So I will share this deck right now. Apologies for the technical slideshow. What you're going to see are a few slides that were shared from the Giving Institute, and what we have not put here is information about them. And I would encourage you to take a look at the full report, which is going to be coming out shortly. This is a digest of it, and the longer version, I think, is close to 70 pages. So these are the top talking points that they provided just in the last 2 days. Well, what I'll do is share some of this verbally, since some of us take in information that way, some of us like it visually, but also because we cannot share these slides. This is part of the way the Giving Institute works, so that we are going to be sharing them right now live. But in order to get the full report, you do want to participate in the work and to order a copy. And for all of you who are not familiar with this report, I think you'll find it well worth the investment. It's available for you both in a digital and a print volume, and you'll find that both really do merit the investment. So we'll start with the big number, which is that, of course, giving declined. If you hadn't heard this news already, well, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it's true. Giving declined to $499.33 billion in 2022. It's still a big number, and many of those who are talking about this week are emphasizing the fact that it's among the largest numbers, as you can see in this chart right here, historically. However, there's a very significant decline we saw in year over year. Giving reached the $500 billion threshold in current dollars in 2021. And when adjusted for inflation, 2021 and 2020 are the two best years of giving on record. But we know that there were a number of economic challenges that affected all of us in one way or another, both our institutions and, of course, all of us personally, whether that was inflation, which is alluded to in the report, the stock market, which of course had a very dramatic effect on major giving, which is a big part of the giving pie these days, and individual giving overall, which you'll see in these results as we go through a little bit. New economic challenges, again, have emerged in 2022 that had, as they describe it, a dampening effect on giving. Those challenges included, once again, the fall in the market. The S&P 500, Standard & Poor's 500, declined 19.4%, or 25.4% adjusted for inflation. You'll see those adjustments for inflation frequently because, once again, I think year over year, it's been about 8% inflation rate for the year. So that's had a very big effect on all these measures, including things that might ultimately impact bequests, although those numbers might not look as bad as some of the rest of the numbers in the report. Disposable personal income declined by 0.1%, or 7.5% adjusted for inflation, and inflation reached 8%. Once again, it's a good thing I remember that, the highest rate in 40 years. But despite these challenges, there were bright spots, and they do want to emphasize that because we don't want there to be an impression that giving has somehow collapsed. Giving is still strong, but it has just been mitigated by these factors. GDP did grow by 9.2%. It's the inflation, of course, had an impact there as well, 1.1% adjusted for inflation. And unemployment reached, as we all know, because everybody talks about it, especially in political circles, one of the lowest rates in the last 50 years. Giving by foundations is growing as a share of total giving. Much of the discussion about giving for many of us for years has been about the role of major giving for all the reasons that we know. And we also know that major giving doesn't occur without a broad base of support across the population. Many of us have been tracking how that has, over the last 20 to 25 years, receded, which is beyond the scope of our discussion today. But it's a significant component of how we interpret these results. And I'm sure our panelists will get into that in a minute. What I mean by that is that now that if you look at the contributions by source, as you can see in the pie chart, that 64% of the money, the $499 billion, is coming from individuals. And that sounds great. But of course, in comparison, let's say to 1982, contributions by source, it was 81% then. Foundations are making up a really significant piece, as they're illustrating here, but 21% overall. $1 of every $5 given to charity in this last year comes from foundations. By comparison, foundations represented only 5% of total giving back in 1982. And giving by individuals, while it grew at an annualized average rate of 4.9% over the last 40 years, foundations grew by 9.2%. Now, we may discuss why as we dive in here a bit, and I'm sure that's one of the things that will be discussed throughout the year, including the role of other kinds of giving which might be under an institutional banner. Sources of giving had mixed results. So we can find that giving by foundations, bequests, and corporations grew in current dollars, as you can see in this chart. And all four sources of giving declined when adjusted for the 40-year high inflation rate of 8%. Corporations and foundations, once again, experienced positive two-year growth, even when adjusting for inflation. And bequest giving, which tends to be more volatile due to large bequests in one year that may not appear in subsequent years, looks kind of like an interesting thing to track. One of the things I know we talked about before we began today has to do with donor advised funds. You won't see that under a category here, but that has been a very important part of the discussion of philanthropy for several years. And I know we'll probably jump into that a bit as well, just a few minutes. Giving by individuals has experienced a decline after, as the Giving Institute puts it, two of the most generous giving years on record. So there are a couple ways of looking at this. And one is in comparison, of course, to gross domestic product, or GDP, which I don't think is a part of this slide. But you'll see that with gross domestic product, we've hovered around 2% and as high as 2.1% of gross domestic product just last year. Now it's down to 1.9%. This is one of those figures that economists look at as one potential measure to interpret generosity. And that's something, again, we'll be diving into. Giving by individuals declined by 6.4%, or, and this is the big number, 13.4% when adjusted for inflation. And when you think about that, that also has a direct impact on how much it costs to do our work. Economic indicators closely linked with giving by individuals decline, including disposable personal income and the S&P 500. Giving by individuals reached an inflation-adjusted high in 2021, once again followed closely by 2020. It's the good news from the recent past. And mega gifts by individuals totaled $14 billion in 2022, including by one really notable individual who may be alluded to later, and we'll be covering in a very a session coming up in the next few weeks in this series. And once again, mega gifts represented about 5% of all giving by individuals for the second year in a row. Giving by individuals has experienced declines again after these two really extraordinarily generous years. And if you look at it as a share of disposable income, you can see it's sort of like GDP in a sense. You can see how these numbers go up and down as people feel like they're more able to give, whether it's because their assets have grown, like they have with the stock market, or whether it's because they feel that they have more disposable income, which they might feel if inflation rates are low. Disposable personal income is tied to total household income, which is, of course, a key determinant in how much households give. And in many cases, how much households give depends on their spendable or disposable personal income. Individual giving as a percentage of personal income, or disposable personal income, was 1.7% in this last year, according to the report. And from 2019 to 2021, it represented 1.8% of disposable personal income. So it's kind of a reality check. If you look at it, what money people had available, they were giving at a similar rate. It's just that they had less of it. Individual giving as a percentage of disposable personal income reached its lowest levels in 1995 and this last year, dropping to 1.7%. Giving by corporations, we won't be focusing on a lot today, I don't think, but has performed more strongly in current dollars amid unusual economic conditions. Factors included the GDP increase to 9.2%, adjusted for inflation, again, it's only 1.1%, and corporate pre-tax profits, which increased 6.6%, although they fell by 1.3% when adjusted for inflation. Corporations had very strong growth across all four sources in current dollars at 3.4%. And corporate giving as a percentage of pre-tax profits remained at just below 1% in 2022. For the past 5 years, levels have stayed between 0.8 and 1%, and corporate giving as a percentage of pre-tax profits reached a high of 2% in 1986, some time ago. I know that a lot of this data can become overwhelming after a bit. We will be digging into this in more detail in a moment, so stick with me. Giving for some subsectors declined from highs reached in the pandemic era for reasons probably many of us recognize, and those may have a direct impact, of course, once again, on the healthcare sector, which we'll be discussing momentarily. The 2022 contributions, which once again were just under $500 billion, we find that religion is still right up at the top with 27%, education at 13%, health at 10%. And we have a chart that will give you a little more detail on health as we dive into the discussion in a second. Some subsectors grew, but not enough to outpace inflation. And the one thing I will point to here is international, which grew very significantly. And the report in the detail does talk about the influence, potential influence of what happened with Ukraine and the Russian invasion, but also the floods in Pakistan, all of which generated additional an outpouring of generosity in the United States for these efforts. So there's more on that in the longer report. Growth in giving to, again, international affairs did outpace inflation. This is just a bar graph demonstrating that. 10.1% with foundations and 10.9% of international affairs generally. So very significant growth. This is not true with every year, but it's also affected dramatically by what's happening in the world. Resilience. Resilience is a word we've used a lot in the last few years. And in terms of the way that organizations are responding, that's a very important piece, whether or not they're innovating. So resilience and innovation developed in the pandemic era. And the Giving Institute believes that those will continue to serve nonprofits well if we continue to employ them. Nonprofits can continue to evolve by, of course, expanding online giving, which has grown dramatically over the years. Mobile devices are now responsible for the majority of all visits to nonprofit websites, as probably almost everyone in this space knows. And over 3/4 of the surveyed Gen Z and millennial donors reported giving to charities online. What we do with those donors online, which we will probably be discussing here and was addressed heavily in the generosity crisis, will be an important way for us to retain donors, which has been one of our biggest concerns. Building the future pipeline of donors and sustaining existing donors is a very, of course, a key component to what we do in the future. Donor communication engagement being key to that, and being able to work with next-gen donors and diverse populations of donors to engage them in ways that are meaningful to them, and to allow them to use their voices and to listen to their voices as important ways of both giving back, but also building that feedback loop with them. Subscription donors were more likely to adopt new tools for giving, such as giving via social media or crowdfunding, according to at least one study. One of the wonderful things about Giving, the Giving USA study you'll see in the larger report, is that they do make references to a lot of other reports in the sector, so some of the underlying data is visible to you. And then adapting to new giving tools such as AI. You've heard a lot about it. You'll hear more about it now. And tools such as ChatGPT, which if you haven't used, I'm sure you will soon, offer new possibilities for nonprofits, fundraisers, and donors when used well and responsibly. Knowing when to deploy these tools is important, since human connection remains as the foundation of all that we do in philanthropy. This is the last thing I promised, and then I'm going to turn it over to our brilliant panelists. This just demonstrates visually what's happened in terms of giving to health between 1982 and 2022. And if your eyes are already blurry from looking at all this stuff, the one thing I'll point to is it's going up, that the solid beige line, if you will, is inflation adjusted dollars. The dotted black line is current dollars. And if you look at the inflation adjustment, it's good to know the trajectory it's taken, but also its recent decline. That is the risk. Once again, I'm going to jump out of this now and give us an opportunity to listen to our panelists as soon as I shift gears here and end the sharing and turn this over, of course, to Nathan and to Betsy. Nathan, you want to take it away?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much, Jay. I know that was a mouthful. And, for the benefit of those that haven't, had the opportunity in the last 2 days to get on many great webinars that are highlighting this information, we just felt like it was worth a few minutes to just level set to provide the backdrop for the rest of this conversation. Rather than wanting to have just the general conversation about, giving in America, we really, and of course with Accordant's strength and expertise in healthcare, wanted to really just zoom in, for a little bit, talk with individuals that are boots on the ground about, how this report, impacts any of their thinking, either this report or prior reports. Does it feel like unexpected or expected? Does it change any of the perspectives on how we move forward as an organization? And as we do that and have this organic conversation, I'll also share additional information about healthcare philanthropy in the sense of individual giving. And Betsy will also share a little bit about the backdrop that is essentially facing healthcare as an industry right now, and the importance of philanthropy as it relates to the viability and sustainability of healthcare organizations. And so before we do all that, I, first of all, want to just, thank you, Jay, for getting this set up. Jenny and Chris, thank you so much for being willing to jump on here with very little prep and notice. You're displaying tremendous amounts of trust in us for allowing us to interrogate you. No, just kidding. To just get your initial reaction on Giving USA. I will speak for myself as we kind of get this going, is that I spent 20 years in fundraising, and I'm like the biggest nerd when it comes to Giving USA report. Probably around 2010, when the Giving Pledge came out, Buffett and Gates were, talking about how they were going to inspire more generosity, and it was going to be this incredible thing. I got really interested in Giving USA about that time, to the point where I like block off my calendar. And as soon as the full report comes out in July, I'll block off my calendar again, and I'll read through all the footnotes, and then we'll come back again and we'll get super nerdy about all this stuff. I've just always been interested, not only in the organizations I've been raising money for, but also from a macro view. You work in a sector that is entirely, kind of based on this idea of trust and, the impact on humanity. So, often we kind of describe our jobs as more of a calling than a job itself. So I'm just curious, first of all, when you're hearing all this information and we get and kind of kick this off, how does this report feel? And I think if you could think about it both in your professional lens of like, you go into work every day and essentially trying to raise more money from less people, essentially is what the report is showing, but also just from your humanitarian lens, like how does it make you feel as a professional in our sector? And hearing the information, and does it change any of your thinking in either of those domains? I guess I should call someone first. So Jenny, do you want to take a pass? Jenny, yeah, why don't you go first and just kind of share your initial observations? Oh, you're on mute, Jenny.
Okay, this is so strange. Can you hear me now?
You can, absolutely.
Very strange, my technology here. But anyway, all right. As far as professionally, I wasn't terribly surprised by this. It was somewhat affirming regarding the direction that we are going as a foundation and where we are choosing to invest. It did make me wish that I had even more resources to invest more sooner in some of these key areas. And I feel a little bit of an elephant sitting on my chest right now, because it just almost feels like you can't move fast enough to stay up with these changes and to keep your foundation as vibrant as possible. And then personally, I will say, and this is also professionally, I'm not surprised as far as the giving. We are definitely seeing more affluent donors setting up DAFs, setting up family foundations. And I think that's having an impact in where they create endowments and whether they create an endowment with you as a foundation or they create that separately. So that's one challenge. I want to believe, though, in humanity. I want to believe in the power of all of us coming together. And so I am staying hopeful, and I'm just so appreciative of our field and having these opportunities to come together and keep each other energized and focused in the right ways. Thank you.
Love that. Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Chris, what are your initial reactions?
So, Nathan, that was an interesting setup. I thought perhaps I finally met somebody who goes deeper or further back with Giving USA to me, but when I got into the field in 1995, this was one of the first tools that my my mentor utilized to kind of demonstrate the broad depth of philanthropy. So this goes back nearly 30 years with me. I don't look at it necessarily year over year, but take a more broad perspective. So if you think about how long I go back and look at this information, I don't claim to block out time in my calendar to spend hours with it as you do, but I do look at this carefully each year. I live, and I think most of the folks on this on today's Zoom are in the healthcare field. I know Betsy's going to talk about the challenges which are growing faster than philanthropy has grown in the past. I obviously understand that we've dropped year over year, although you'll note that healthcare went up a little bit more than 5%. So it's a mixed bag of reactions. If you take a look at, if you go back to say 15 years ago, and you were to take the total giving in the United States and divide it by the total population, roughly $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States was donated to a charity 15, 20 years ago. If you take these numbers and overlay it with the US population today, it's almost $1,500. So it's weird how that math works out despite a drop year over year. So I'm enthused by that. I find the shift from individuals and the pie chart showing the percent, while individuals is still at the top of the list. The percent to me is surprising somewhat in that it's small, but then I wonder if the migration and growth in foundation giving kind of alludes to what Jenny just talked about, in that you've got individuals, high net worth individuals setting up DAFs and foundations, and perhaps their giving is being channeled through there more than it has in the past. In terms of our own world, healthcare and health has always come in at the same slot since I've been in the field, nearly 30 years. I'm wondering when we can get to 4th or 5th on the list and not dragging around the 6th, 7th, 8th mark. I think that our country needs it. Of course, I think we're deserving, and the patients that rely on us now and in the future are certainly more deserving. So that's the competitive side of me. The number of donors dropping year over year is not surprising whatsoever in light of the pressures and inflation that we're all experiencing. It'll be interesting because inflation is certainly not going to stay at 5% forever. At some point, it will get down to whatever target the government is looking for, 2% or what have you, and to see if the number of donors will come back then. But I think what's offsetting that to a certain extent are the number of mega gifts and the size of mega gifts. If I were to tell you that, or if you would have told me 25 years ago that organizations would routinely be getting 8 and even 9-figure gifts, I'm not sure, even if the glass half full, I'm not sure I would have fully believed it, but indeed, that's where we are today. So a 9-figure gift to an organization can offset a heck of a lot of lower level gifts, thousands and thousands, if not more. And so I think we should see the curve start to bend upwards again, would be my uneducated analytical prediction for the following year or two.
Excellent, Chris. Thanks so much. And I think that it provides a great segue for Betsy. I've heard Betsy speak about this quite a bit. Really kind of just a quick overlay on the financial pressures in a rapidly changing sector in healthcare, and the relationship to philanthropy to not just be kind of the icing on the cake, but to help actually drive margin of excellence at the very least within healthcare organizations. So Betsy, do you want to frame that up just to kind of paint that broader picture, and then we'll dive back deeper into kind of some of the strategies that we're seeing working or not working?
Sure. So, just first looking at the report, we did at least hit the double digits this year. That healthcare garnered 10% of total giving for the first time in more than a decade. We've been hovering around 8 to 9% for a long period of time. And as Chris said, the same people have been invited to the top of the dance every time. We've seen religion, education, human services, and grant-making organizations. The order of those has shuffled forever, and we keep coming in 5th. So on one hand, our position has not changed. We're still sitting in the same place. I think what has changed is the position of healthcare in the overall universe. The acute financial pressure that we are seeing right now for hospitals and health systems is historical. It is unprecedented. And if you look at how healthcare organizations have had access to capital over the last couple of years, it has been an incredibly difficult situation. If you watch some reports like, say, Kaufman Hall, the National Hospital Pulse Report that comes out every month, in May, they said, hey, it's a glimmer of hope. We broke even for April. And so when you look at operating margins being being break even, and we're cheering about that. Break even means we have zero in our bank account, that we took $1 to earn $1. That means we have nothing to invest in the progress of our organization, nothing to chase competitive advantage, nothing to chase innovation. And so, when we sit there, I look at philanthropy, and I think philanthropy must step up and be that alternative revenue source with a high return on investment that represents a low risk. And so, given that there are significant dollars going to healthcare, we as healthcare leaders must make sure that we are harnessing those dollars to do the most important things within our organizations. Because without philanthropy right now, I don't know where we think we're going to get money to invest in our future progress for our organizations. And look at all the other pressures. We not only don't have money coming in and are sitting at a flat operating margin, our labor costs are increasing. Our ability to retain nurses, physicians, and others has been very tested over the last couple of years. Supply costs are continuing to increase. Our volumes are going down, and our length of stay is increasing, which volumes going down, length of stay increasing, that's a bad thing. We're getting paid off of the same amount of money, and we're keeping somebody in the house longer. So healthcare is in a moment of crisis where we need philanthropy more than ever before. And so this is our moment to look at all this information and determine how we're going to respond in a smart, strategic way to deliver what we need to do for our organizations.
Awesome, Betsy. You're always so articulate with really describing something that's extremely complex in a very succinct way. So I appreciate that. And I'm also very comfortable in the hard facts. Wrote a book called Generosity Crisis, which has not made me a lot of friends, but really kind of with this idea that, you can't make change unless you know the facts, right? And really how pervasive is really the shift. So I'll share just a couple more data points on individual giving. And then I want to go to Jenny and really talk about, you had mentioned some of the things that you wish you could do if you had more people or you had more knowledge or this information sooner, things that you would adapt and change. And then Chris, I want to dive more back into kind of the sense of mega gifts that you were talking about and some of the inherent advantages and disadvantages of doing that, for our field. So this report is really interesting. Of course, it just came out. And the full report's not out, so we can't go through all the footnotes, but preliminarily, there are a lot of firsts in this report. And it really is through the lens of looking at it from a current dollar perspective or an inflation dollar perspective. And, the reality is, and me and a lot of my background is more in business and economics, I'm like current dollars don't help me today. Like current dollars literally mean nothing because it really is it's this philosophical idea of what it would have been. But inflation adjusted dollars, when we're looking through this report, and these are for those that are going to download the report and read through, inflation adjusted dollars is what it feels like today. So not only this need for philanthropy that Betsy is talking about has never been greater, the dollars that are being raised and provided to a hospital actually are not going as far if you're looking at it from inflation adjusted dollars. So the dollars that we're providing to those organizations are not going as far as they would have in prior years. And so it's a double-edged sword. You have to raise more to essentially kind of stay even, if you will, philanthropically. So other firsts in this report, and really for me, the backdrop and, really consistent with the theme of the generosity crisis is that individuals in America are largely opting out from charitable giving. They may be giving in other ways. GoFundMe processes one transaction per second, 24/7, almost exclusively not through nonprofits. And so their generosity is still alive in America, but many nonprofits have been seen now or being seen now as a barrier to giving versus an amplifier of giving. With that said, the report shares, if you dive into the individual giving aspect of it, that basically 49.1 billion less by individuals was given in 2022. And if we take an average gift size, so we're just talking about the average patient that you're going to acquire, average gift size in our computations are at $239. That's national. That means there were 205 million fewer gifts made in 2022 than the year before. 205 million fewer gifts were made last year than the year before. And so this is one of those data points of oh, something's different. Yet when I speak to an organization, I don't think I've ever spoken to an organization that had a decreased annual goal. So in most organizations, 99%, if you're the 1%, like more power to you. Organizations and CDOs keep their jobs by raising money and then the next year raising more money. But the backdrop and why I got so interested in this so many years ago is that every year raising more money, but essentially from a shrinking pool of donors. It's been around 16% decline. This year was the largest single decline in the history of the Giving USA report in individual giving. So let's go back to Jenny, because with that, again, it's like elephant on your chest, maybe just got heavier. What do you do about that? So you're a CDO of a very successful Children's Hospital Foundation, and you're raising money on both ends of the spectrum, individual, from a acquisition perspective and patients, and also from your major gift and principal gift donors. With that context, essentially less people, essentially making up a bigger part of the pie, like how do you reconcile with that? Like, do you just focus on a certain part of the pipeline, or do you still continue to push forward?
Well, thank you for that question, Chris, sorry, Nathan. And what I want to say first, really quickly, I want to just share that Children's Minnesota is an independent pediatric health system. So we have 2 hospitals and we have many clinics and rehabilitation centers and all that. We are the 10th largest nationally of independent pediatric health systems. There are 3 other children's hospitals within our market. So we have Mayo and we have Masonic Children's at the U of M and we have Gillette. So keeping that in mind and knowing that we do see the most kids, we have the most beds. We are 100 years old. So we are absolutely embedded in this community and care for about 60% of the market. Okay. Now, when I came, the team, and that was 4 years ago, the team was at about 26. And then with COVID and with needing to, hold hiring, and also there was a need for a RIF across our health system during that COVID year of 2020, we started 2021 with 17 FTE. So I just want you all to know that this foundation at one point had 45 FTE. We started 21 with 17. We are currently at 26. So we are very much we say small but mighty, and fully intend to keep growing. And we are setting the groundwork for a comprehensive campaign. Now, I also want you to know that we as a foundation together have been evolving the culture internally and externally around the work of major principal and planned giving. Those were areas where, yes, there was some success in the past. They previously had a very successful campaign, but it was a practice and a culture that wasn't deeply embedded here. This foundation was very much known for event fundraising, many, many events, and also that direct marketing annual fund. So where we initially leaned in was very much in building that major principal and even planned giving culture, knowing that there's fewer gifts being made, they're much larger gifts, and needing to get that truly embedded. We've made great progress there. And I want you also to know, all of you, that full disclosure, last summer, we did a call for proposals for consulting firms to help us on this journey of a comprehensive campaign, and we chose Accordant. And so my leaders and I, we have been working with Betsy and her team since last fall. We also have, I think it's 2 or 3 year history of working with DonorSearch, and Nathan is aware of us as well. Now, it wasn't until I had the good fortune to attend the retreat in January that Accordant held for its clients. And please know, Betsy and Nathan had no idea I was going to say this. I truly am kind of flying blind, but I trust Betsy and Nathan. But I want you to know, a pivotal moment for me was going to this retreat. And there were phenomenal presentations. And what I heard over and over again was the importance of of the full gamut, the full sphere of donors, and definitely not only major principal and planned, but also you have to still care about your pipeline. You have to still be growing it. And it's always been my philosophy when you're a children's hospital that every gift matters, and every donor out there needs to see a path to partnering with the health system and making a difference for kids and families. So I've always welcomed all those gifts, and I've always instilled in my team that we love all of them and lift them up. But it also means you have to invest there as well. And the other piece that really hit me hard was artificial intelligence. I want to thank Nathan for that. Talk about putting the sphere of the universe in a person, but in such a good way. I recognized that day, and I had my colleague there, one of my VPs of foundation operations, and I knew then, as well as my director of operations, we need to be leaning in here even more. We are not leaning in here enough with DonorSearch. So I hope I'm getting to the answer here, Nathan, in that I want everybody on this phone call to know, small but mighty at 26, but where am I right now working with my leadership and Accordant and Nathan to determine how we spend our dollars the rest of this year and in future years? It is around strengthening that pipeline. And that means grateful family fundraising. That means working with our nurses and our clinicians to be comfortable, working with our data in a smarter way. It also means we are leaning in even more to planned giving and making sure that we are staying on pace in what we're building there, and so much more. And so, Nathan, what I say to you, and I think about Betsy, and I would love to just, Betsy, oh my gosh, I wish I could have you by my side more often with some of my leadership, because everybody, I have tremendous support from my peers, the fellow chiefs, chief financial officer, chief operating officer, and the CEO of this health system. I do. I also recognize, and I have already stated the date, it's going to be mid-August, where I will be doing a presentation to my peers and the CEO about investment in the foundation and what it can mean if we invest at 3 different levels for the ultimate dollars we can bring in. Because what we're all facing is our leadership in these health systems, and I'm at that table, everybody. There's a profound need to invest in IT for the whole health system. There's a profound need to invest in recruiting and retaining nurses and other key care positions. There is a profound need to invest in new business development, whatever that might be. And so how do I, in a even more successful manner, show that the investing in philanthropy, in the foundation, is one of the best, if not the best, return on investment? And not that I don't want those other areas invested in, but I have to make sure that I'm arguing for the right size investment for the foundation. And there's data here, and there's data in working with my partners to make that case. That's on my mind.
Thank you, Jenny. I love that. And we love working with you. And thank you for the glowing endorsement. The check will be in the mail, or a meal will be on us next time. And really, this is where rubber hits the road, right? Your goals continue to increase, your teams tend to fluctuate. And we hear this a lot from CDOs right now, that staff retention is one of their key, retention and happiness is really one of their key indicators for what they're focused on. So let's go. Thank you for providing all of that. Chris, you had mentioned, you're talking about mega gifts a little bit, or principal transformative type gifts. And one of the things that, we're seeing with this report, and you talked about going back to 1995, is, back in 1995 or it was 1982 was the, 81% of all gifts were individuals. And, in foundations were 5%. This is like a major shift, obviously. So essentially more high net worth people, ultra high net worth people are creating foundations, parking their money there to give in kind of different ways. How you, as a leader, like when you think about how you spend time with your team today, kind of allocate time between, say, principal transformative gifts, knowing that the ROI is super high, but they're limited, versus the rest of the pipeline that he is talking about as well? Like, how do you think about the time kind of balance between those two different things? And has that shifted over time? Is it shifting even more so toward high net worth, kind of in your perspective?
It's a great question. So, our system, just to give some background, like Jenny did regarding her situation. So Mass General Brigham has 14, we have 14 different development offices. A couple obviously with Mass General itself and Brigham itself, a couple of very large academic medical centers with huge development teams. And then we have community hospitals that might have certainly less than 10 or a handful of staff. So, we have a wide swath. They're appropriately sized in terms of size and scope and sophistication. And as a result, what they end up raising on an annual basis, if you will. So what's transformative to a large 1,000-bed academic medical center, which has, which draws donors from literally all over the world, to a tiny 30-bed hospital that might be on an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We have 2 of those. They're very different things. So what hasn't changed, in my view, is the emphasis on major and then ideally principal and transformative gifts, whatever that means for the particular institution. I saw somebody shout out in the chat, thank you to Jenny for mentioning annual giving. And if you take a look at a simple analysis, if you look at, say, your top 5 or top 10 donors historically to an organization, what are their largest gifts? And then go back and take a look at what their first gift was. So first gift ever to largest gift, which almost always is transformative for many organizations. The length of that time can be on average. I did it at my last institution. I think it was somewhere on average in the neighborhood of 13 years. We had 19 years from a first gift to a $10 million commitment, as an example. It would be foolhardy to say to, for example, a board that would say, well, why would you bother with annual giving? Why would you bother with online giving, platform giving, direct mail, special events? Throw them all out and just work on the biggest gifts, because we know the number of donors is dropping. And that would be an enormous mistake from my perspective, because the transformative donor of 10 or 20 years from now is probably one of our small donors today, whatever platform or mechanism by which they're supporting you. So it's our responsibility as development professionals. I likely won't be at my organization in 20 years. Most of us probably can say the same thing. But if one day when we do leave, whether it's tomorrow or 5 or 10 years from now, are we leaving the organization better positioned for its future? And so ignoring the smaller donor, and this is why I think the number of donors in particular is concerning, is because somewhere we're very fortunate this year. We have several 9-figure gifts throughout our health system this year. But at one point in time, those donors were tiny, small, and the way in which they first interfaced with us was probably a grateful patient experience, probably a gift under $1,000 that has grown to whatever it is today, which has been phenomenal for the institution and whatever it supports. So I don't know if that answers your question in terms of where to spend your time. I still think proportionately, the majority of your time needs to be at the major donor level and higher. That's the greatest ROI, of course. We all know that. We've known it for many years. And what Betsy talked about just a few minutes ago, the financial situation at all hospitals nationally is so acute right now on a financial basis that we don't have time to sit there and stare at a CFO and say, I'm going to spend a lot of time with $100 donors, $500 donors, et cetera, and so forth, and wait for them to turn. Cash is king right now, and it's vital. And so the whole mechanism, or the whole pyramid, if you will, of gifts deserves your attention proportionally. However, you really do need to spend your time with the major gifts and those with major gift potential and higher.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think that it's refreshing to hear that, you still have that commitment to the balanced portfolio and in building that pipeline. We're very similar, cut from the same cloth, because I did the same analysis in my previous institution, and it was around 18 years from first to largest gift. And also, when I looked at the number of gift officers that someone had assigned to them over that 18 years, it was 24 on average. So like that donors are outliving the gift officers, and the churn and burn aspect when we're fully committed. And I think, because we're going to round out, we only have a few more minutes. Like this conversation could be literally hours. I'm sure we could solve all the world's problems, without any problem at all. is one of the takeaways. Una Asili from Lilly School of Philanthropy was on an interview yesterday when I heard, and she was asked to provide one key takeaway from the report, and it was the focus on building authentic connection with individuals is essentially something that I think philanthropy has been, I think we're all part of, is we've allowed technology essentially to make giving more transactional than more relational. So when I started in the sector before GuideStar, it was just relationship. And now, we've automated so much of that. How do you think about that statement from your perspectives and kind of thinking through the whole pipeline? Like, what does that mean to you? Like, thinking through, like, is it KPIs or is it like the type of people you hire? Like, what does it mean for you to invest back in building authentic relationships with individuals? You want to go first, Chris, and then we'll
Sure.
go to Jenny and then Betsy?
To me, it's the baseline of the industry. I mean, it's how we do our work day in and day out. Sure, technology's changed. Any of us who've been in this industry long enough remember days when there weren't philanthropy donor databases, forget CRMs and all the technology tools that are available to us. But we're not going to close 7, 8, 9-figure gifts through technology purely.
Mm-hmm.
It's about how you harvest the technology that you have at your disposal that leverages the ability to create authentic relationships. So at the very heart, this business always has been, and in my view, always will be about that authentic face-to-face relationship, whether it's gift officer to prospective donor, clinician to prospective donor, CEO, board member, what have you. That doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
We just have more tools in our toolbox to enhance how we find it. It's more of a needle in a haystack approach than it's ever been, in my view. And that also is going to continue.
I love that. And that's in fact why I got into AI working in healthcare back in 2017, because there's so much data, needle in a haystack, throwing spaghetti on the wall wasn't working. How do we do the intuitive part of our business, but do it at scale, faster, more accurately, efficiently? And that's really the focus of my work for the last 6 years. So Jenny, how do you think about this? The need to build these authentic relationships. How does it change? I assume that you have a fundraising team that have KPIs related to raising money. How does the dichotomy of like raising money versus building relationships, are they in sync? Are they in conflict with each other? Like, how do you as a team reinforce, like, we are a people business?
Thank you for that question. And I want to, I'd answer it by saying they do have KPIs. It's right-sizing their portfolios. It is not only what they do, but I think it's having a very strong donor relations team, which we have, and making sure that they're doing their work in such a way that they're able to maximize appropriate touches to our donors at different levels, so that they are also feeling that they're in the know, that we're communicating to them in ways that they want to be communicated to. And I also think this goes back to AI and all levels of giving, and the new generations coming along that want to be philanthropists. Yes, at a smaller level, but Chris, as you said, and I think this is one of the noble aspects of our profession, is how are we leaving our foundations when our time at them is done for those who follow us. And so it's investing and using that AI now at all levels, being strategic at all levels for all types of donors. And I trust there's a way to do it. We have to be asking the tough questions, and we're going to have to make some tough decisions. For those big gifts, it's all about the people and the one-to-one, but there's more gifts and a strong pipeline that we also have to build. Thank you.
Excellent. And so Betsy, we've got 3 minutes. I know I've been completely remiss in getting some of the other questions, and there's been a lot of great questions, and I've been focused on the people aspect of it, not in the chat aspect of it. So why don't you round out, and then if we have time for 1 or 2 questions, we can real quick.
Yeah, I want to just throw some things out there that I hope open the aperture a little bit. I am thrilled that we hit 10% of total giving this year and $50 billion given to healthcare. I want to also call your attention to the fact that human services garnered 14% of dollars this year, and public society benefit garnered 9%. If you are participating in the next curve of healthcare to address social determinants of health, population health, social needs, whatever you want to call it. Those are dollars that are available for your mission. You need to think about how you take a more expansive view of health, because health is also about community health and well-being. And some of those dollars could be directed to your cause. Another thing I think you've got to think about within the report, if an individual donor has made a contribution to a donor advised fund and those dollars have not yet been distributed to a beneficiary, they are showing up in the public society benefit bucket. And so there are still dollars out there for which a donor has already made a decision to be philanthropic that they've not yet determined what the cause will be. That is an opportunity for you to raise your hand and say what you're doing. Finally, one more point. I'm trying to be really fast. While we've seen the number of dollars coming from individuals decline, I think you've also got to consider that 50% of foundations are private family foundations. In the United States, from corporate giving, which was growing, 90% of American businesses are owned by a single family. Continue to lean in around relationships. This continues to be about values, purpose, what we believe in, and the dent we want to make in the universe. So I will round up and hand back in the 60 seconds we have.
I cannot believe this time went so quickly. And there's so many other good questions about AI and about DAFs and things. We won't be able to get to all of them, but I do know that we will be able to get back to people via email on some of those questions. Some of them are very simple and others require a little more explaining. But I can't thank you all enough for, again, your willingness, your trust, and just showing up and having, I think just an incredibly rich conversation around, what the Giving USA report means to those that are, healthcare professionals, and how it's influencing your thinking. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Chris and Jenny, so much. And Betsy, of course, is such a great partner for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Nathan, for that. Betsy, for your leadership in this discussion, but in all things, both at your seat at the helm of Accordant, but broadly across the sector. Really, really admire your work. And of course, to our other two guests, really extraordinary guests, Jenny from Minnesota Children's and Chris there at Mass General Brigham. And if you're not familiar with their institutions, which would be surprising, but if you're not, I hope you'll look them up. And if you're interested in learning more about them, look up their profiles also, not just within their websites, but on LinkedIn. Their institutions are so extraordinary in their impact that they're worthy of your support. But as leaders in the field, they're also people you want to follow. We have a lot more to discuss on this. And as Nathan said, we just scratched the surface. So I hope that if we've practiced what we preach, we will take both what was in the chat and the questions, but also what you send to us afterwards as the foundation of the discussions we will have throughout the year. Giving USA only comes out once a year, but this discussion doesn't end when Giving USA falls out of the news. This is too big for that. That said, I hope that you'll go and look at Giving USA, which is at www.givingusa.org. For a copy of this report so you can digest it, discuss it within your office, and then come back to all these people as well as to this series with your questions. We were fortunate today to be partnering with Accordant on this session and grateful for that. DonorSearch, of course, is the sponsor of this series as a whole, but we are very, very lucky to have partners in companies like Accordant who are leaders in the sector, also partnering to send the message out. So with that, I want to encourage you to reach out both to the people here, but also to me personally. If there are things that you'd like to see in this series in the weeks ahead, you can do that at j@donorsearch.net. It's j@donorsearch.net or on LinkedIn. And also you can look for a copy of this recording to share it with your colleagues. And you can do that over at donorsearch.net under the resources tab, or better yet, you can pull out your phones right now and you can get ready for a QR symbol you're going to see in just a moment. The QR code will allow you to go a direct link to information about DonorSearch and to see all the things there. So with that, I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank you for hanging out with us today and invite you to come back in the weeks ahead when we tackle this in even more depth. So with that, thanks to you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks,
everyone.